January 31st, 1968. 0247 hours. Tan Son Nhut Air Base, Saigon Specialist 4. Danny Ramirez crushed out his cigarette and checked his watch again. 2:47 in the morning. The Tet ceasefire had everyone relaxed. Half the ARVN guards had gone home to celebrate the Lunar New Year with their families. Even the MPs seemed loose, joking about which Saigon bar they'd hit once their shift ended. Ramirez shouldered his M16 and resumed his patrol along the perimeter fence, where $2 billion worth of American aircraft sat in neat, vulnerable rows. He never saw the nearly naked man rise from the drainage culvert 20 meters behind him. Senior Lieutenant Nguyen Van Than emerged from the concrete pipe wearing only black shorts and a cloth wrapped around a canvas satchel. Sewage dripped from his body. He'd been underwater for the last 40 minutes, breathing through a hollow reed, waiting for the American patrol to pass. 3 more sappers materialized behind him, identically dressed, identically armed. They moved like ghosts toward the fuel depot, where 500,000 gallons of aviation gasoline would create a fireball visible for miles. Ramirez would survive the night. Tan Son Nhut would not. And America's confidence that it controlled even the capital city would die in the explosions that followed. The sapper attack doctrine, Dac Cong in Vietnamese, represented something American military planners never anticipated. An enemy willing to sacrifice elite soldiers in suicide missions requiring months of training, using nothing but explosives and near superhuman stealth. While American generals focused on search and destroy operations in the jungle, North Vietnamese sappers were literally swimming through shit to reach the heart of American power. In late 1967, American military intelligence knew North Vietnamese sappers existed. What they didn't understand was the scale, sophistication, and psychological impact of sapper operations. MACV classified them as irregular forces, essentially guerrillas with explosives. This catastrophic underestimation would cost hundreds of American lives and damage billions in equipment. We were aware of some small-scale infiltration attempts, recalled Colonel Robert Henderson, G2 intelligence officer for 2 Field Force Vietnam. What we weren't prepared for was the level of training, discipline, and tactical coordination these units displayed. They weren't guerrillas. They were special operations forces as good as any in the world. The sapper units, officially designated Dac Cong battalions, fell under the direct control of the North Vietnamese General Staff. Selection was brutal. Candidates underwent 6 to 12 months of training that would have challenged American Special Forces. They learned to swim silently for hours, to move through razor wire without making sound, to memorize target layouts from crude sketches, and to place shaped charges with precision. Most critically, they learned to accept near certain death. General William Westmoreland's headquarters initially dismissed sappers as a minor tactical nuisance. The focus remained on big unit operations, body counts, and attrition warfare. Our strategic emphasis was on the main force units, admitted Major General Joseph McChristian, MACV-J2, from 1965-1967. We tracked NVA divisions and regiments. Small penetration teams didn't register as strategic threats. This blindness had roots in American military doctrine. The U.S. had no comparable force. American special operations emphasized direct action raids, not suicide infiltrations. The cultural disconnect was profound. American planners couldn't imagine an enemy investing elite soldiers in one-way missions against infrastructure targets rather than deploying them in conventional battles where they might survive. The few early warnings were ignored. After a March 1967 sapper attack destroyed 6 aircraft at Da Nang Air Base, the after-action report noted unprecedented infiltration capabilities, but recommended only minor perimeter security upgrades. The assumption persisted that determined defense could stop determined offense. What American commanders failed to grasp was that sappers didn't attack defenses. They circumvented them entirely. Vietnamese military tradition shaped this approach. For centuries, Vietnamese fighters had used deception, stealth, and acceptance of casualties to defeat larger, better-equipped enemies. The Chinese, the Mongols, the French, all had been worn down by Vietnamese willingness to absorb losses that would have broken other armies. Sapper doctrine was this tradition refined to surgical precision. The modern Vietnamese Sapper Corps traced its lineage to the Viet Minh's assault on French positions during the First Indochina War. At Dien Bien Phu in 1954, Viet Minh sappers had crawled through French minefields to breach bunkers that artillery couldn't crack. Those lessons became doctrine. By 1965, as American ground forces deployed to Vietnam, the North Vietnamese General Staff was already expanding its sapper program. General Vo Nguyen Giap personally oversaw the creation of specialized training facilities in North Vietnam and Cambodia. The most important was Camp 506 near Hanoi, where instructors included veterans of Dien Bien Phu. Training began with physical conditioning that exceeded anything in the American military. Candidates swam for 4 to 6 hours daily, building lung capacity and cold tolerance. They practiced holding their breath underwater for 5 minutes or more. They learned to move through water without creating ripples, essential for infiltrating via rivers, canals, and, most audaciously, urban sewer systems. The worst was the wire training, recalled Pham Van Dong, a former sapper who survived the war. They strung concertina wire in patterns matching American bases. We practiced penetrating it for hours, often at night, until we could move through triple-strand wire without sound. Any noise meant failure, and you repeated the exercise. We bled constantly during training. Sappers learned to navigate using only crude maps or aerial photographs. They memorized target layouts, fuel depots, ammunition bunkers, aircraft revetments, command posts. Training included scale models of American bases built from intelligence gathered by Viet Cong operatives. Sappers would practice attacks on these mock-ups until they could move through them blindfolded. Weapons training emphasized explosives over firearms. Each sapper carried satchel charges, canvas bags packed with TNT or composition explosives, sometimes studded with metal fragments. Bangalore torpedoes for breaching wire. Shaped charges for specific targets. The goal wasn't firefights, but destruction. Get in, blow targets, escape, or die. The psychological preparation was equally intensive. Political officers emphasized the righteousness of the cause and the honor of sacrifice. Many sappers wrote final letters to families before missions, letters they carried into combat. This wasn't fatalism, but acceptance. They knew the odds and chose to go anyway. By 1967, North Vietnam had organized several dedicated sapper battalions. The most elite was the 305th Battalion, which answered directly to COSVN, Central Office for South Vietnam. Each battalion contained 500 to 600 men, organized into smaller cells. These cells operated independently, receiving target assignments but planning their own infiltration routes and tactics. The first major sapper operations in South Vietnam targeted logistics infrastructure. In August 1966, sappers destroyed the fuel depot at Quy Nhon, burning 2 million gallons of diesel and JP-4. In November, they penetrated the Long Binh ammunition dump, triggering explosions that lasted 3 days and destroyed 20,000 tons of ordnance. American security responded with more guards, more lights, more fences, never recognizing that sappers didn't fight through defenses but around them. The sewer infiltration technique evolved from necessity. Vietnamese cities had French-built drainage systems, concrete pipes large enough to crawl through, often emptying directly into military compounds built over old colonial infrastructure. Sappers realized that American bases, constructed rapidly on existing Vietnamese urban sites, often overlooked these subsurface access points. "We mapped the sewers of every major city," explained Colonel Bui Tin, a North Vietnamese staff officer. "Saigon, Da Nang, Bien Hoa. We knew which pipes led where, which were monitored, which were ignored. American engineers never thought to block them because they didn't believe anyone would enter them." The calculation was correct. American troops found the Vietnamese sewers revolting. Open channels carrying human waste, garbage, and chemical runoff. The stench was overwhelming. The thought of deliberately entering them for hours seemed insane. But to sappers, they were infiltration highways leading directly to target areas. January 30-31, 1968. The Tet Offensive. The Tet Offensive transformed sapper operations from tactical nuisance to strategic weapon. Across South Vietnam, sapper units struck American and ARVN installations simultaneously, demonstrating coordination and capability that shocked American commanders. In Saigon, the most audacious attack targeted the U.S. Embassy compound. At 02:45 hours on January 31st, a 19-man sapper team from the C-10 City Sapper Battalion blasted a hole in the compound wall using a C4 explosive. They poured through the breach, armed with AK-47s and satchel charges, intent on reaching the embassy building itself. What followed was a 6-hour firefight that played out on American television. The sappers never reached the embassy building. Marine guards and military police held them in the courtyard. But the psychological impact was devastating. The American embassy, symbol of U.S. power and commitment, had been penetrated. Walter Cronkite would call it proof that the enemy could strike anywhere, anytime. But the embassy attack, though dramatic, wasn't the most damaging sapper operation that night. That distinction belonged to Tan Son Nhut Air Base. Senior Lieutenant Nguyen Van Thon and his 15-man team had spent 3 days infiltrating Saigon's sewer system. They'd entered through a storm drain in Cholon, the Chinese district, and navigated underground passages following maps provided by Viet Cong intelligence operatives. They crawled through pipes barely wide enough for their shoulders, breathing through reeds when passages flooded, eating cold rice balls in absolute darkness. The Americans thought their perimeter was secure. Nguyen recalled in a 1985 interview. They had guard towers, lights, patrols, sensors. But they never imagined we would come from below, from their own drainage system. We emerged inside the wire, behind all their defenses. At 02:45, the coordinated attack time across Saigon, Nguyen's team surfaced near Tan Son Nhut's fuel depot. They moved in pairs, placing shaped charges on storage tanks with practiced precision. The first explosion came at 02:47, followed by 11 more in rapid succession. Aviation gasoline created a firestorm visible 20 miles away. The heat was so intense it melted helicopters parked 100 meters from the depot. Simultaneously, other sapper teams hit aircraft revetments, the base ammunition dump, and the Mask V compound itself. They destroyed 24 aircraft, damaged 35 more, and killed 23 Americans. 8 sappers died in the assault. The rest escaped through the same sewers they'd infiltrated from, vanishing into Saigon's maze of waterways. At Long Binh Post, the sprawling U.S. Army installation northeast of Saigon, sappers achieved even more devastating results. Captain Tran Van Hai led a 30-man team that penetrated the ammunition storage area. They used Bangalore torpedoes to breach the wire, then raced through the compound, placing charges on ammunition bunkers. "We trained for this specific target for 2 months," Tran explained years later. "We knew the layout better than the Americans who worked there. We knew which bunkers held the most volatile ordnance, which buildings stored artillery shells, where the RPG ammunition was stored." The first explosion occurred at 310 hours. It triggered a chain reaction that continued for over 18 hours. Secondary explosions hurled 155mm artillery shells 3 kilometers. The blast wave shattered windows in Saigon 12 kilometers away, When the fires finally burned out, 30,000 tons of ammunition had been destroyed, enough to sustain American combat operations for 2 months. American casualties from the explosion itself were surprisingly light. Most personnel had taken cover after the initial blasts. But the sappers had achieved something more valuable than body count. They demonstrated that no installation was secure, no perimeter impenetrable. The psychological impact rippled through American forces across Vietnam. At Bien Hoa Air Base, sappers destroyed 27 aircraft in a coordinated attack that breached 3 separate perimeter sections simultaneously. At Da Nang, they damaged the fuel pipeline supplying the air base. At Chu Lai, they demolished the ammunition depot. The pattern was clear. These weren't random attacks, but precisely coordinated strikes against American logistics infrastructure. What we realized that morning, recalled Lieutenant Colonel David Hackworth, a veteran infantry officer, was that we'd been fighting the wrong war. We'd been focused on finding and destroying main force units in the jungle, while the enemy was training elite units to strike our rear areas. We'd built these massive bases and thought they were secure. Tet proved we controlled nothing beyond the range of our rifles. The American response was tactically effective, but strategically meaningless. Within days, base security was reinforced. Guard posts doubled. Engineers began mapping and blocking sewer access points. Motion sensors and ground radar were installed. These measures reduced successful sapper penetrations, but the damage was done. The Tet Offensive, though a tactical defeat for North Vietnam, thousands of Viet Cong and NVA soldiers died in the attacks, became a strategic victory. The sapper operations, particularly in Saigon, destroyed American credibility. How could the U.S. win the war when elite enemy soldiers could swim through sewers and blow up air bases? After Tet, both sides evolved their approaches to sapper warfare. The Americans implemented new security protocols. The North Vietnamese refined their tactics. American bases began systematic surveys of drainage systems. Engineers blocked culverts with steel grating or filled them with concrete. Perimeter areas were cleared of vegetation for 100 meters or more, creating killing zones. Trip flares and motion sensors were planted in depth. Guard dog teams patrolled likely infiltration routes. Some bases pumped tear gas into sewer systems before attacks were expected. We basically had to assume every underground passage was a potential infiltration route, explained Captain James Burton, an engineer officer at Long Binh. We spent months mapping and blocking drainage systems. The problem was these systems were extensive and often poorly documented. You'd block one access point and discover 3 more you didn't know existed. Night security became obsessive. Guard towers were reinforced. Searchlights swept perimeters continuously. Random patrols moved through interior areas, looking for infiltrators. The psychological burden on American troops increased. You could never assume you were safe, even inside the wire. But sappers adapted faster than Americans could respond. They shifted away from sewer infiltrations toward other methods. Some teams infiltrated disguised as ARVN soldiers or civilian workers. Others buried themselves in shallow graves near target areas days before attacks, lying motionless for up to 72 hours before emerging at night to strike. The sappers had one enormous advantage, noted Colonel Harry Summers in his post-war analysis. They were willing to accept casualties that would be unthinkable in Western militaries. A sapper team might lose 70% of its men in an attack and still consider it successful if they destroyed the target. That calculus made them almost impossible to deter. The North Vietnamese also decentralized sapper operations. Rather than large-scale coordinated attacks like Tet, they shifted to smaller, more frequent raids. Individual teams of 5 to 10 men would strike isolated targets, communication sites, supply convoys, small outposts. These attacks rarely made headlines, but created constant attrition and forced Americans to disperse security forces. One particularly effective innovation was the standoff sapper attack. Teams would infiltrate close to targets but not penetrate perimeters. Instead, they'd fire RPGs and mortars from positions inside villages or civilian areas, then withdraw before American firepower could respond. This tactic exploited American reluctance to fire into populated areas and caused damage without the casualties of direct assault. American forces countered with their own innovations. Quick reaction forces, helicopter-borne infantry, could respond to sapper attacks within minutes. AC-130 gunships orbited major bases at night, able to engage infiltrators with devastating precision. Improved intelligence, including interrogation of captured sappers, revealed training locations and techniques. But the fundamental asymmetry remained. Americans had to defend everything all the time. Sappers only needed to succeed occasionally. As General Crichton Abrams, who replaced Westmoreland in 1968, observed, "We can't put a soldier on every square meter of Vietnam. They can put a sapper anywhere they choose." Vietnamese sapper veterans described their evolution differently. "After Tet, we knew the Americans would strengthen security," explained Vo Van Keet, a sapper commander. "So we shifted focus from spectacular attacks to steady attrition. Small teams, frequent raids, always moving. We wanted them to feel unsafe everywhere. Not terror, but exhaustion." This strategy proved devastatingly effective. From 1968 through 1971, sapper attacks caused more American casualties and equipment losses than any other single enemy tactic. Yet they received far less attention than main force battles. The media focused on firefights and body counts. Sappers operated in darkness, literally and figuratively. The psychological toll on American troops was severe. Living on bases that had been penetrated created constant anxiety. "You'd hear a noise at night and your heart would start pounding," recalled Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, who served at Bien Hoa in 1969. Was it a rat? Or was it a nearly naked man with a satchel charge crawling toward your bunker? You never knew. You never relaxed. Sapper operations reached their peak effectiveness in 1969 to 1970, even as American forces began withdrawing from Vietnam. During this period, sappers struck with increasing sophistication and declining losses, a combination suggesting tactical mastery. The August 1969 attack on Cam Ranh Bay demonstrated this evolution. Cam Ranh was America's most secure installation in Vietnam, a massive logistics base on a peninsula with only one land approach, heavily defended by multiple security rings. American planners considered it virtually impregnable. On August 8th, a 12-man sapper team infiltrated via water, swimming 5 kilometers through open ocean to reach the base perimeter. They used rebreathers to avoid detection, surfacing only to navigate. Once ashore, they moved through the base for 3 hours, placing charges on fuel storage tanks, ammunition bunkers, and parked helicopters. The attack destroyed 15 helicopters, damaged 9 more, and ignited 100,000 gallons of fuel. All 12 sappers escaped by swimming back out to sea, where a fishing boat recovered them. 0 casualties, maximum impact. That attack was a masterpiece, admitted Colonel William Corson, a Marine intelligence officer. It demonstrated that even our most secure facilities were vulnerable. The sappers had achieved something we couldn't match, the ability to strike anywhere while accepting losses we couldn't sustain. Statistics tell the story. Between 1968 and 1970, sappers destroyed or damaged over 1,400 American aircraft. More than were shot down by anti-aircraft fire. They destroyed fuel depots containing over 50 million gallons of fuel. They triggered ammunition explosions that eliminated supplies worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet this tactical brilliance couldn't overcome strategic reality. Sapper attacks, however effective, couldn't force American withdrawal. Only political pressure in the United States could do that. And while sapper raids contributed to declining American morale, they weren't the primary driver of anti-war sentiment. That came from mounting casualties in conventional ground operations. The North Vietnamese recognized this limitation. "We knew sappers couldn't win the war alone," explained General Tran Van Tra, commander of Viet Cong forces in the South. But they could make the Americans question whether staying was worth the cost. Every destroyed aircraft, every burning fuel depot, every penetrated base made the war more expensive, more frustrating, less justifiable. This strategy worked, but slowly. Nixon's Vietnamization program reduced American forces from 543,000 in 1969 to 156,000 by 1971. As American troops withdrew, responsibility for base security shifted to ARVN forces, who proved far less capable of defending against sapper attacks. The frequency and success rate of sapper operations actually increased as American forces declined. The final major sapper operation against Americans came in April 1972 during the Easter Offensive. As North Vietnamese conventional forces drove south, sappers struck American installations that still operated in-country. At Tan Son Nhut, now primarily an ARVN facility, sappers destroyed 26 aircraft in a night raid that killed 18 ARVN soldiers, but no Americans. By this point, American ground combat troops were largely gone. The war had shifted to aerial bombardment and limited advisory roles. Sappers continued operating against ARVN targets, but their strategic purpose had evolved. They were no longer trying to drive Americans out. That was happening anyway. Now they worked to destabilize the South Vietnamese government Americans were leaving behind. The ultimate irony of sapper operations was that their very success demonstrated their limitations. They could destroy installations, kill soldiers, and create psychological terror. What they couldn't do was hold territory, govern populations, or build political legitimacy. When North Vietnamese tanks rolled into Saigon in April 1975, they achieved what sappers never could: total victory through conventional military force. The sapper attacks left an enduring mark on American military thinking. They exposed fundamental vulnerabilities in how the U.S. military approached base security and counterinsurgency. The lessons shaped future conflicts, often painfully. In Iraq and Afghanistan, American forces obsessed over force protection in ways that directly traced to Vietnam's sapper experiences. Massive concrete barriers, elaborate checkpoint systems, and paranoid security protocols all reflected institutional memory of sappers swimming through sewers to blow up air bases. Whether this hyper-defensive posture helped or hindered counterinsurgency efforts remains debated, but its origins are clear. Vietnamese sapper veterans carry mixed feelings about their role. "We did what was necessary," reflected Nguyen Van Than, the Tan Son Nhut raider, in a 2008 interview. "We sacrificed our youth, our health, sometimes our lives. Many friends died in those attacks. But we believed in our cause. We believed Vietnam should be independent and unified. The methods were harsh, but so was the war." American veterans who faced sappers describe a unique form of combat trauma. Unlike conventional firefights, where enemies were visible and tactics comprehensible, sapper attacks felt like supernatural threats. The enemy could be anywhere, could appear from underground, could be living in the drainage system beneath your feet. This pervasive sense of vulnerability left psychological scars distinct from other combat experiences. The broader lesson of sapper warfare is uncomfortable for military professionals. Determination and ingenuity can overcome vast technological superiority. The United States had helicopters, sensors, night vision equipment, and unlimited resources. North Vietnamese sappers had explosives, training, and willingness to die. The sappers didn't win battles in conventional terms. Their casualty rates were staggering. But they achieved strategic effects disproportionate to their numbers. This asymmetry highlights the fundamental challenge of counterinsurgency. When one side must defend everything and the other can strike anything, the defender is at an inherent disadvantage regardless of military superiority. This reality shaped not just Vietnam, but every insurgency that followed. The sapper legacy in Vietnam itself is more ambiguous. The unified Vietnamese government honors sapper units as heroes of the resistance. Their sacrifices are commemorated in museums and monuments. But ordinary Vietnamese who lived through the war remember the terror of those nights. Explosions, fires, and chaos that didn't distinguish between American targets and Vietnamese civilians. Danny Ramirez survived Tet. He served out his tour and returned to California. Nguyen Van Than survived too, eventually becoming a teacher in Ho Chi Minh City. They never met, never knew of each other's existence. But for one night in January 1968, they were connected by a moment of violence that changed the course of a war. The sappers who swam through Saigon sewers wearing nothing but underwear and satchel charges didn't change the fundamental military balance in Vietnam. American firepower remained overwhelming. But they changed something more important. They changed perceptions. They proved that no base was secure, no perimeter impenetrable, no defense foolproof. In doing so, they contributed to the erosion of American will that ultimately mattered more than any battlefield victory. That's the enduring lesson of sapper warfare. In counterinsurgency, the side that appears invincible can be defeated not by matching their strength, but by exploiting their psychological vulnerabilities. The willingness of Vietnamese sappers to crawl through sewage and accept near certain death to destroy enemy materiel demonstrated a level of commitment that no amount of American technology could overcome. The war ended. The sappers won, though many didn't live to see it. And somewhere in the archives of military planning, their legacy persists. A reminder that desperate men with explosives and determination can challenge the mightiest military in the world, one sewer pipe at a time.